month's Social Change Career Impact podcast with Lydia Cardona on tips on resilience in your social impact career journey. And there's also another part to that title, wherever you are, there you are, or there you go. I'm Craig Zelzer from PCDN. Thank you for joining us. And this session is supported in part by the Rotary Peace Fellowship. So applications open in February, and it's one of the world's leading fellowships for social impact professionals. They offer a full master's degree funding and also professional certificate at one of 8 institutions around the world. We'll put the link in the chat. I assume whether you're watching us on YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And also this is supported by the PCDN Career Campus. So if you're looking for kind of amazing community advice and support, we have weekly open office hours, all sorts of workshops, people from 30 countries and 300 curated opportunities a month. So check it out on our website. Lydia is a sustainability innovator, educator, sustainability professional, human rights expert, learning designer. She's currently based in North Carolina and has about 7 to 8 years of impact career experience, including working for Conservation International at their center. I'm going to get it wrong, but the Center for Environment and Peace. I might have that backwards, or peace building. She has a master's degree from Monterey International, MIIS.
Trinity College Dublin.
Oh, why did? Okay, sorry. Somehow, yeah, that was I should have your bio in front of me, so I'm totally apologize to Trinity College and their alum. And she currently works on learning experience design for an amazing organization called Verite, which works on human rights and multi-stakeholder engagement. For people who have not joined us before, I will ask some questions. Dr. Rojas was supposed to be joining us, but had some technical difficulties based in Medellin, Colombia. We'd love for people watching on LinkedIn, if in the chat box, if you can put a sentence or two where you're watching from. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, we'd also love to bring in your questions. If you're watching this live, if you're watching this or listening to this later as recorded session, this will become an episode of our Social Change Career podcast, which features about 105 episodes with the world's leading innovators and changemakers from 20 plus countries. So if you listen to this as a podcast, please check out our other episodes and consider rating us. And so Lydia, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you for making time out of your schedule. And just to start off with, I gave, again, apologies for mislisting your graduate institute, but can you talk a little bit about what type of change are you seeking to impact in your career overall, regardless of the specific position?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for having me, Craig. So the thing that I'm most passionate about and in trying to work for in the work that I do is ensuring that sustainability is really taking into account the human well-being component. I think so often, especially now as sustainability is growing as a career in a sector, people are so often thinking about it in terms of decarbonization and are really focused on that environmental element of it. But I think it's so important as well to think about sustainability from the holistic perspective and really accounting for the human needs part of it that is so integral to its success. And so I work in more of the human rights space right now, and I think that that's equally important coming from the rights perspective and the rights sector is the need to integrate that environmental and sustainability part of the equation equally. So that's really what drives me in the work that I do.
So we have people watching from actually we have India and Africa so far. So I'll just show welcome Shyam, welcome Messiah, welcome Margaret. Please let us know where you're all zooming in from. And also feel free to include a sentence or two about your background and interest in sustainability. So we have to give you credit. We were doing some chatting about this session and you came up with a term about career mindfulness. And a big part of this session will be both on sustainability careers and the opportunities, but also how to be resilient as a professional in kind of the often bumpy and winding journey of a sustainability impact career. So first of all, what in the world do you mean by career mindfulness? And can you talk about how that applies to you and what you're hearing from your peers and younger professionals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny that stood out to you because I feel like I made it up in the moment. I have no idea if it's a real term out there, but that is often what I have been reflecting on in my own career. And as I've been talking to other professionals who are going through moments of, what's next for me. in their career is really that practice of career mindfulness. And the title of the session is Wherever You Go, There You Are. It's really an idea within mindfulness to be present-minded. And I think for me, so often, because it took me so long to really get into my social impact career and know what it was that I was doing and wanted to do, I so often experience this perspective of when I get to this point in my career, then I will be successful, and then I will have an impact. Or when I have this title, that's when I'll really have made it in the career that I want to be in. And I've heard a very similar perspective from a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends. For some time when I was in DC, I was the co-chair for the Young Professionals Network, as well as a co-chair for the Young Professionals Interest Group with the Environmental Peace Building Association. So really generally within the social impact space, I've been hearing this from young professionals, and it's that, it's really hard to get into XYZ, career. And I might be unfulfilled in where I'm at, and I will be successful when I get there. And so in the journey that I've had, it's been quite winding, and I've had a lot of really diverse and intersectoral experiences. And it's taking me, the 10 years of this winding path to really realize that where I'm at currently is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And the challenges that I face in my work right now are the ones that are going to eventually help me to really achieve that why, if I home in on them and really focus on being present with them and sitting with them, even when they're uncomfortable. Instead of just persistently focusing on what is this, next step that I need to be taking, and what my title needs to be. So for me, that's career mindfulness, is being present in the work that you're doing, and really trying to wrestle with those challenges that are present in your work, even if they don't have the buzzwords or the keywords that you think that your career should be having in this moment.
Wonderful. And we might have had one of our streaming channels cut off. I think it's brought back. If anybody watching this, if you got cut off, the full recording will be eventually in our podcast, and we'll put this, be on LinkedIn and YouTube. So we have a couple more people joining us. Philip from Kenya, Jesus from Spain. So please let us know where you're zooming in from. So honestly, I think it is a brilliant term. So not that you should trademark it, but career mindfulness. Is there an example that you would feel comfortable sharing without giving away anything too personal about how you've actually put that into practice, either when you've been searching for jobs or you've been trying to figure out, because it's great, it's like so much of the professional thing is I can't, I'll be successful in my career, I'll be happy when I get to this, whatever this is, the right position of power, the right salary. So can you give an example of how you've used career mindfulness in an actual yourself, or maybe if you don't feel comfortable about yourself, some advice you've given to a peer where you could share some of his or her experience without giving anything away that's personally identifiable?
Absolutely. So I will say, I'll give kind of the retrospective perspective, and then how I've applied it recently in my life. When the first sort of road bump that I had in my social impact career was when I graduated college. I was convinced that I was going to go into the Peace Corps, and I had already, I planned my graduation early so that I could finish early and do the 27 months and go straight into, graduate school, and I had everything planned out. But around that time, I discovered that I had a really, terrible insect allergy. And when I interviewed, my placement was going to be in Latin America. And so I was wrestling between, do I risk getting bit by an ant and, having to be extracted potentially for my Peace Corps assignment, or this job that I had been offered in the DC area working in public sector consulting. And it wasn't what I had envisioned myself doing by any means. It wasn't within the international space. It wasn't necessarily what I envisioned being the social impact space. But I ended up taking that job because in the moment, I was encouraged by a lot of really great mentors that it was the right path to take. It was a really great professional job, great exposure, great, location being in DC. And so I took that job, and I would say that I very much was in that mindset of, well, when I take, where is it that I need to be instead? How can I be in the international space and the social impact career that I want to be in? And I didn't really focus on really the benefits that I was getting from that wonderful, career exposure that I was getting. And they're very much the ones that I have continued to build off of and become passionate about in the past several years of my career. So I, developed a lot of technical products, a lot of knowledge products, technical writing, research and editing and that kind of thing. And because they weren't specifically focused on, sustainability or peace issues, I didn't recognize at the time that that's what I would thrive and enjoy doing. And so, then I did go on to do my master's and kind of find myself in that international space that I wanted to be in. But, I think that mindset really stayed with me for a while of, okay, well, now that I'm here, now that I finally made it into this career, and it took me like 10 years really from when I, was in high school and envisioned where I wanted to be, to finally getting into a career that really felt like it was where I wanted to be all along. I think that mindset really stuck with me. And so, I would say that I definitely have struggled for most of my career with, am I of the, do I have the title that I should have? Am I making the impact that I think that I can be making? And so for me, I went through a period of really leaning into mindfulness, actually, to build my resilience and to really sit with where it is that I wanted to be. And it was through a lot of mindfulness literature that I came to this recognition that I really am exactly where I should be in this journey. And one of the sort of visuals that has helped me the most and that sticks with me to this day is having read the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you have ever read it, Craig. It's wonderful. It's a really short book. I highly recommend it to anyone out there. But it's about, people finding meaning in life and where exactly can you do that, written from the perspective of a Holocaust survivor who went through the horrific experience of being in a concentration camp. And he also happened to be a psychiatrist and homes in on a couple of key areas where people can find meaning, one of which is their work. And at the end of the book, the visual that really stuck with me was he was speaking about a situation with a patient that he was providing therapy to, and he asked her, she was really struggling with depression and other issues in her life, and it was a fairly young person, and he asked her to visualize herself when she was 85 years old, towards the sunset years of her life, and to think about what were those things that she did between that moment and that 85 years that really resonated with her and that felt like it was meaningful in her life. Was it the marriage that she had? Was it the work that she did? Was it the kids that she had? And it ended up being that she really focused on those sort of higher level, longer term things in her life that she recognized were the source of happiness for her. And I think for me, and for many others like myself, particularly in, the millennial mindset of, I want to be in XYZ place really fast, we're thinking in short-term spurts. Whereas, if you think about the arc of your life, it's not, however many years you spent in a particular industry or a particular title that you have, those aren't the things that you're going to remember when you're at the end of your life. It's going to be the lives that you touched individually in some way, whether that was personally or professionally. Those are the things that are going to really remind you of how your life had an impact. And that's what I've been taking with me in the work that I've done for the past several years, and focusing not just on what I do professionally, but really trying to take that path in my own personal life and trying to make an impact locally. And I think that has really driven a lot of my sense of fulfillment, is being able to be engaged with my community and recognize that those are the things that I will hopefully be remembered for.
Wonderful. So I'll ask two more questions, then we have them starting to come in. And thank you everyone for adding your questions. And we have all over Africa, India, UK, Colombia, US. So thank you everyone for watching. And we had our Career Impact pop-up a few months ago, and Flynn Coleman gave one of the keynote speeches, which we'll be releasing today or tomorrow. And like you, like all of us, she works on really hard, complex issues. And she, one of the questions was like, how do you sustain yourself when the challenges? I mean, no one person or organization can fix the world, but she said hope is a resistance. Like, she just has to do it, and I just love that framing. But two questions. So one is, I don't want you to name any employers, but there's so much dysfunction in, I mean, all career sectors, but also in social impact work. So how do you balance like working on huge, challenging issues, being mindful, but also like there's self-care and there's also just like system-wide challenges. So that challenge between like taking care of yourself, but also like the system sometimes can lead to burnout or dysfunction. So how do you find that balance between, you know, working on sustainability or human rights or supply chain, or, you know, or environmental issues, and you know, not burning out, but also realizing the balance of self-care and how institutions should be supporting people doing this kind of work?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I think for me personally, it comes back to having a powerful mindset focused on resilience. And what I think the word that you said there was really key, like practicing hope. So all of these things are, to take a word from mindfulness, they're a practice. Sustainability, you know, the climate crisis, you know, erosion of democracy, wherever you are, these are all really pressing issues that are actively happening. And working in this space, you're constantly thinking about them, right, at a systemic level, as you said. And I think it's very easy to feel powerless. And what I have found in my work and also in my own mindfulness practice is that really cultivating this mindset of hope and resilience is something that I constantly have to come back to. So, you know, I think that Christiana Figueres wrote a book recently that really focuses on the powerful impact that having a mindset of hope can have in tackling the climate crisis. Because if you think that the world is doomed, you're not going to be incentivized to take action. Right. And so I think it's very similar when it comes to, you know, our careers and when it comes to the issues that we work on. Right. If you're constantly, you know, looking at the macro level of the issue, I know earlier I said, you know, it's important to kind of take this higher level view of your life. But I think very often the opposite is necessary when it comes to our day-to-day experiences with our work, because the issues are enormous and they're always going to be there. And I think that the more that you can kind of micro scale that issue, the more influential I think you're going to feel. And so for me, at a practical level, that came down to trying to have an influence on my community, because the issues that I work on every day, you know, I think are going to be there for quite a while. But I can do something today in my community to address, you know, poverty or education in a very real and tangible way. And I think that feeds the hope that I need to persist, to keep striving in the social impact space.
Wonderful. So a question has come in from Shyam, who I know has been working on large-scale agricultural economic empowerment projects in India. So what is the trending space to learn in the developing sector? So, you know, any insights for where to develop mindfulness? I mean, do you use apps, you practice by yourself, you go to a community? I mean, what you feel comfortable sharing?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I have a personal fondness for the app called Calm. They have a lot of really great meditations there. I am a deep lover of books by Thich Nhat Hanh. That's spelled Thich Nhat and then Hanh. He's a Vietnamese monk who recently passed away, and he has amazing books that are very accessible, very short. And yeah, there's an abundance beyond that, but those are the really quick and easy ones, I would say. And then just more broadly, in terms of the sustainability, you know, trajectory, I think the developing sector, I would also really, again, encourage people, my own bias is the importance of really ensuring that you have intersectional approaches that take into account the environmental and the social pieces together, instead of, you know, operating in silos.
Just for people who don't know, I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh is amazing, and he was actually nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's a, you know, Vietnamese. I mean, unfortunately passed away. I think he was 87 after having a stroke. But he really engaged Buddhism, which a lot of people have used. So it's not about sitting and meditating and, you know, reaching nirvana. It's about being centered, but then taking radical action in the world. And he did a lot of that. And so, I mean, I like his books and readings too. And I use a different, I mean, Calm's good. There's Headspace. I use one called Aura Health Insight Timer. I mean, these apps are not substitutes, but but if people love other apps, you might put them in the chat box. Because, and then one of the questions in your career to date, how have you found, apart from the individual level, what are employers providing, or what kind of informal peer networks do you rely on? Because, I'll say an example, like, I mean, whether it's working in migration camps or doing some of this work is insanely hard. And some people are fortunate, like I have 2 passports, I can leave and go in and out. Some people are not fortunate to have any place to leave, because this is not just their work, it's their country or community. But what networks have you found useful for kind of when you find a challenging situation, ethical situation, or just something stressful? And I'll say, like, I've done therapy on and off, and increasingly I've seen in a lot of sectors it's becoming normalized to, I'm not saying therapy is the answer, but it can be very beneficial. It's becoming normalized for people to say, like even if you're not exposed to challenging, just like building that wellness practice into your being. But like, where do you go to kind of get the peer, whether it's formal, informal support, or have you seen employers saying, like, I wish all employers would provide sabbaticals, where like you could just take paid time off and just be, but like, what are you most excited about or seeing in this sector?
Yeah, I do feel like there has been an increase in focus on wellness within the social impact space. And yeah, I have seen employers who have provided access to subscriptions, like, these mindfulness apps that we just talked about, which is super important. I personally really think that having Good Samaritan days, I had an employer that also did that. And I think that really connects you back again to, taking time off and doing something actively good in your community around you. And that provides you a powerful energy that I think can be really nourishing and restoring. I once took that opportunity to participate in being an election officer with my Good Samaritan Day, and it was an amazing experience that inspired me in a lot of ways to participate more actively in my electoral system. So I think, any time off that can be offered, and really thinking about mental health as part of your overall wellness, and being able to take sick time specifically for that, I think is a growing perspective. I don't think that it's necessarily out there in a lot of places, but it's certainly growing. And like you, I've also taken advantage of therapy, and I think that it's a resource that most people who have health insurance have and don't necessarily know how to access. But because of the pandemic, there's so much of that available online, at least in the U.S. So I would definitely encourage people to really take into account all of that. And the network part, I have focused specifically on my own peer network and being able to talk openly about my experiences with close friends at work, and just my close friends in general who are also working in this space, and that's been really helpful.
Thank you so much. So welcome Geraldine from Namibia, Cosmina from Romania, so quite a global audience. Actually, not that many people from North America. We have about 10 minutes left, so please feel free to put in your questions, comments, or favorite resources around resilience. So one question, just reflecting back on your work to date, it's not so much a resilience question, but where do you feel most excited about the impact you've helped have to date? Like, is there a particular project, country, organization, and then where do you hope to continue to have impact? Not sorry, in this, like, where are you aspiring to maybe grow your community impact or other level impact in the next 10 years?
Yeah. So I would say that the work that I did at Conservation International is for me is the greatest probably source of pride, because I have felt like the time that I had there, I spent 4 years at the organization, really tangibly led to changes in the work that I was doing. And so the program that I worked on, environmental peace building, it's been around as a field for a couple of decades, but it has always been particularly small and niche, and broader changes were happening within that sector at the time that I was there. But specifically, within the organization, I feel like the work that I did in growing that program, building greater partnerships, and trying to do advocacy within the organization about the importance of really centralizing human well-being into our programming work. while I was there, it was hard to see where that went. But as I reflect on it now, I can definitely see that it made a huge impact, and it really accelerated the growth of that work. And so, yeah, again, I think that's where that perspective of like when you're 85, 90, what is it that stands out to you from the glimpses that you have of your life? And I think that for me, that'll definitely be a part of that I got to engage in that space. And I think there might have been another part of your question, but
I mean, anywhere you're seeking, like in the next 10 years, or let's say 50 years, I mean, hopefully you'll live to, 100. So, if you make it to 100 and we still have a viable planet, like, what is something you hope to look back and say, I mean, obviously this is forecasting, you don't know if it'll happen, but that you can say like, you would be, I mean, there's lots of personal goals, community goals, but professionally, in 60, 70 years, if you said, if you can help be part of X, like what would X be?
I would say that I would like to be a part of making diverse communities within my own community, within my state, more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And so that's again where I continue to really focus on what can I do locally, because that is where I feel like I would have the greatest influence on changing something that is a systemic issue. And so, I'm actively seeking out ways to get involved with various different climate organizations that operate at the national and local level, and then bringing in that perspective of equity and diversity, especially as a Hispanic American. I'm very deeply aware of what that looks like in the countries that a lot of our community comes from. And what those inequalities look like here. And I would just love to be able to look back on my life and say that I did something in that space.
For those interested in, obviously, so much of the negative impacts of climate change are being disproportionately towards countries and communities that are not the ones creating maximum climate damage. So is there any particular organizations or networks, whether it's North Carolina, US, or global, that you think for people who want to like make sure they're not just thinking about climate change, but really about equity and impact? And who do you most admire? Where would you say people go to, look at how, whether it's an environmental organization or a funder or a corporation, how to start thinking about climate justice equity?
That's a really great question. I think that there are a lot of really great, really grassroots organizations that are doing amazing work in the Southeast. I'm going to Google the name of one of them right now, whose name I'm struggling with, but it's really, I think, a hallmark of what that work can look like in terms of advocacy at the regional level. I think it's the Gulf Coast Center. Yeah. Okay, I'll have to follow up with you on that one. But
is it part of the Center for International Environmental Law? Or it's a different organization because they're doing interesting work.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't followed them, but it's run by Colette Pichon-Battle, and she's amazing. The work that they're doing, and there's also. I would say that if you're looking to get involved really within the U.S. locally, Citizens Climate Lobby is doing really great work in terms of like mobilizing people at the local level and building advocacy networks that are making change within at the electoral level.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And feel free to put in your favorite resources. So Marta, thank you for suggesting this book. It is, Andrew Zolli, it's a great book. I think I read an early draft copy or review part of it. And Andrew actually works for Planet, which is a very interesting startup that is using the power of satellite imaging, where I don't know how many satellites, they have hundreds of satellites where they're doing, every day kind of documenting the impact and changes in climate. And they're a B corporation and publicly traded actually. So, and they have a lot of, climate scientists and, satellite builders, but it's an interesting place to both look for employment, and that an example of a startup that's gone public that is using technology for social impact. So it's not about spying and using, satellites and other technology to spy on people, but to look at climate change and agricultural production. So it's called Planet. So it's an interesting one to look at. Welcome, Caroline, and everybody else. So I will ask one more question, or maybe two more, but I want to see, we still have a few more minutes if anybody would like to put in more questions. So one question for you, if a younger, or I'm sure you are approached by many younger professionals, particularly, let's say, from Latina or Latino backgrounds, but also from all over. And if someone says, like, I just want to work on sustainability, I don't know where to start. What is your advice for people who are like, the planet is on fire, literally, or it's becoming parched? Like, how does someone decide where to match their skills to opportunities? And there's so much need. Like, how do you recommend people figure out where to go, both for upskilling, but also where to decide what sector or type of organization to work in?
Great question. I would say, I mean, it depends on where they are in their career. I would say if it's somebody who's in college, coming out of college, there are a ton of opportunities through online that you can search on the website Volunteer Match. There's a lot of local environmental organizations who are constantly looking for volunteers to help with things like sustainability plans. And so trying to get as much real world experience, I think, is the best way to know where you fit in. Once you're solving a problem, you understand what parts of the problem you're really passionate about and have skills in being able to take on. And so, yes, definitely getting practical experience in some aspect of that work is where I would start. And I think, for people who are further along in their career, networking and talking to people on LinkedIn through this forum right here, all of the great resources that you provide, Craig, I think is huge, because when you talk to people, you're better able to say, that sounds like something that I'm excited about or not, before having to invest in, a degree necessarily in that space. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, so Volunteer Match is great. Terra Do and Climate Ace and Climate Asian, Climate Base are all three incredible platforms that do a lot on upskilling, connecting to climate careers, and just helping you figure it out. And they have a lot of free things, and each one does have some things for fee, but they're great for just in climate base in particular. I mean, Terra Do has a climate school. The Climate Base has, I think, the best job board so far for climate and sustainable careers around the world, including a lot of remote ops and everything from marketing to technical to scientific. So in your free time, what are you currently working on learning? It doesn't have to be professional, or are you watching a great Netflix show or reading a book, like something that you just, whether, I mean, I'll say Catalina and I were watching, for anyone who has Apple TV, there's a really depressing news series called 5 Days about the Katrina hurricane, and about what happened in one particular hospital and the absolute failure, systematic failure at every level around how that impacted people in the hospital. And then just one other, I'm not trying to promote Apple TV, but there's also the most interesting series I've ever seen in the future work, going blank on the name, but it's, I'll have to look it up before I finish, but it's all about the future work and has a brilliant cast and is totally bizarre, funny, and Severance is the name. And yes. But what are you reading, watching, or learning these days?
So I am actually two things. I really love science fiction, and so I am revisiting Stranger Things because the newest season came out, and I just find it to be really fun, and actually would love to explore, I think, as a next step for myself, develop writing climate literature, because I feel like that, again, if you feed into that hopefulness, to the idea that that's where, we can really catalyze change. I think literature has a really great role in doing that and inspiring younger minds. So I would love to do that. But I'm also more on the professional side. I'm doing a certificate in user experience design, because I have found in my work that, so often program ideas are based off of, what people have always done, business as usual. And they're not centered on, really understanding the context in which the work is going to be based, or having data about the stakeholders that it's going to impact. And so it's just my way of making sure that I'm personally proficient on user-centered design.
Okay. Can you describe just briefly, and welcome Vikas from India. Is that a Rotary World Peace Fellow? I assume that's what it means, but let us know. That's another great fellowship, and of course they're helping to sponsor this. And I put in Climate Tracker, which is great for all things climate and media, and they actually have a lot of fellowship programs. Then also My Climate Journey is another great one. But can you just explain a little bit, how are you developing those skills? Are you an informal training program, doing it informally, or like where are you building your skills around learning, design, and user experience?
Yeah, I'm actually taking a course on Coursera. It's a certificate program that they have available through Google, and it's very tech focused and user experience design from the tech perspective. But I think all of the principles for really user-centered design apply across any context. And it really starts with understanding, empathizing with your user, or that could be the community that you're working with, and ensuring that you're understanding what it is that they want, and not just thinking of stakeholder needs in terms of who your donor is, or specifically what your organization does.
Okay. And how are you using that in your current work, or it's more you're starting to use it?
Oh no, I definitely use it in my current work. So as a learning experience designer, a lot of the work that Verity does is capacity building, because it's how you change practice with private sector clients who we're trying to improve their supply chains to make sure that child labor, forced labor are not present in their supply chains, and how can they develop systems to be aware of what that even looks like. And in order to do that, you have to really understand who it is that you're developing these programs for and doing a capacity building intervention for. And so I'm applying that to try to improve the way that my organization is able to take into account the learner needs, whether that's farmers in Mexico who we might be training on their rights, to the producer organizations that we work for, and thinking about their perspective as suppliers. And really using that data to inform these capacity interventions.
Okay, so last two questions. One is, you're currently working remote, and two questions there. One, how are you finding? Because you previously you were obviously somewhat in the office, and then connected to that, for people looking for remote social impact opportunities, any suggestions? Because there's this saying, talent is universally distributed, opportunity still isn't. So how, one, what does it feel like for you to be working full-time remote? And then any recommendations for how people might find those opportunities?
Absolutely. So the first part of that was, how is it for me working remotely, right? I love it. I think that, I think it provides so much opportunity to really try to focus on that personal wellness part, because you're not spending a lot of your day commuting. You're not in, stressful environments. So for me, it's been a really great setup, but I do miss, having that human interaction. So there's definitely pros and cons to it. And I would say, in terms of those seeking out opportunities, so many organizations are now shifting towards remote work. My own organization, for example, right now, was previously not remote before the pandemic, and now they are. And we're actually hiring as well. Verity is. So I would say, set up a LinkedIn alert that has the keywords that you're looking for, and you can type in remote under location, and that should trigger a lot of opportunities that are open to you working remotely. And a lot of government agencies in the U.S. are also transitioning towards that. I know the Department of Transportation is specifically allowing remote work now, and they are also hiring for sustainability focused jobs. So there's a lot of opportunity out there that is remote based. And I think that, just being savvy in how you type in keywords and search for opportunities is key there.
Okay. And then, is there anything else you want to recommend for professionals or aspiring professionals in the sustainability space? Or actually, here comes a question, so let's ignore that, from Messiah. So this time around, experience matters most. So what is your advice to a fresh graduate who doesn't have, let's say, that much experience in sustainability and lives in a place with high unemployment? So that basically, whether it's in the U.S. or I think Messiah is from Southern and West Africa, any recommendations for people where it's hard, it's the catch-22, like employers want you to have experience, and if there's high unemployment, it's hard to get that experience.
Absolutely. To the extent that this is possible, and I realize that this comes from a very privileged perspective, but I think that to the extent possible, if you're not actively working because you need to work and provide an income, try to acquire volunteer experience outside of your work in the area that you want to be working in. If you are in a community with high unemployment, there might be social issues within your space that really require local action, and try to take the opportunity to become a leader in solving one of those problems locally. And you can then speak to that experience, to an employer. That because you didn't work for an organization doesn't mean that you didn't have that practical experience. If you can show that you took initiative, that you showed leadership in trying to take on that problem. So I would actually look locally to see where you can act.
Right. Yeah, and Masai, that question comes up so often in all parts of the world. In Colombia, where Catalina and I live, there's an expression called the NIMI generation, which is neither formal employment nor formal schooling. And youth unemployment is pretty high here, not as high as some countries. And there is no easy answer, because everybody, unless you come from a very wealthy background or have a patron, everybody needs to pay the bills. I think I would agree with Lydia, like a lot of times, if you can build in some volunteering opportunity, which again is privileged, there is a movement. It's still very slow, trying to end unpaid internships. There's a great organization in the US called Pay Our Interns, which has done amazing things around this, and actually led the White House and State Department to start doing paid internships. So one is, if you're doing an internship or volunteer, try to find something paid. And then the other thing is just continuous upskilling, because there is so much you can do for free or super cheap, or ask for fellowships. And then, and then also look for ways, can you land a small consultancy that's paid, or, it's very challenging, insanely frustrating. And LinkedIn, if you use LinkedIn to build a network, not to seek transactional opportunities, that is also a really smart way, but it takes 6 to 9 months. It's not about going to LinkedIn and saying, give me a job. It's about building a network where you can kind of provide value, and then people will start seeing your value. But it's insanely hard. And then there's a lot of job upskilling programs, that are both government funded, nonprofit funded, World Bank. There's so many upskilling opportunities, but obviously the competition is fierce. So that is one of the central challenges of today's age. And so, Lydia, anything else you want to suggest to people, things you would recommend they look up, and before we end?
Yeah, so I remember the name of the organization that I was blanking on, the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. Highly recommend looking at their work. And then, another opportunity that's available specifically within the US is the Fuse Core Fellowships. There's a lot of sustainability opportunities that are focused on working with local governments and developing sustainability plans, for example. So that's a paid opportunity that, is, I think, a really great entry point for a lot of people who may have done a degree and are looking to make an entry point.
Yeah, and there's also Africa Corps starting. I mean, there's a lot of things, Nigeria has the National Youth Service, so there's a lot more things starting, because this is one of the critical challenges that increasingly, even if you have higher education, that doesn't necessarily translate to the right opportunities in the job market. So thank you, Lydia, so much for sharing your wisdom and taking time out of your day, and for a lot of really good insights. And I hope it's okay that others, if people want to use career mindfulness, I hope they will attribute that to you, unless that came from somewhere else. Because I think it is such a brilliant term, both in terms of the individual level, but thinking about how to the ecosystem and systems level, because there is such a danger of burnout, which I've done multiple times. And then when you add in economic stress or other stresses, that like it's such a real challenge. And unfortunately, the system still isn't built to put the well-being of both professionals and the communities they work with at the center. It's such a challenge. So thank you so much. Please, follow Lydia on LinkedIn. And thank you so much. Have a great afternoon in North Carolina. And thank you, everyone who joined us from really all over the world. And starting in September, we're going to move this to twice monthly. So we have all sorts of amazing guests already set up, including from, there's a great, our next guest, I think, is September 10th. I have to check the date. Dimitri Gershon from Enduring Planet, which is doing some of the most interesting work on climate financing. So it's a startup, and instead of saying like all climate startups should get venture capital, they're doing revenue-based financing. And right now they're only in the US, but the obsession in the startup world is you have to get financing or investment. And they're saying, no, if you've got a sustainable model, like to grow, you can take revenue-based. So there's just so much going on in that. And please rate the podcast on your channel. Check out the Rotary Peace Fellowship and the PCDN Career Campus, and have a wonderful afternoon. Lydia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Craig, for the opportunity.